Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to episode 2 of Scars into Stars. I am here with these two amazing individuals. This is Joel, he's an attorney, and this is Monica from Empowering Coaching. Did I say that right? And we're gonna have an amazing conversation today about the ins and outs of relationships, how to know you're protected, how to know you're safe, and what your rights are in terms of a divorce. Just talking about things that people don't know just right off of the bat. Okay, so first of all, thank you both for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we're going to do it the same kind of structure as we did our last video. Just first talking about a discussion about what people should know, what you find important that your clients know. And then we're going to answer some of your questions that you have sent in. So one thing that I have seen is that, I think that when anyone is entering a relationship that leads to an engagement and eventually leads to, a significant, change in the relationship when people start to live together or like a marriage, have kids, the dynamics do change in the relationship. I think as people get more, more comfortable with each other, there are certain things that can come out that, you wouldn't see. Maybe there were red flags, but there was, no major thing that impacted the relationship. So people don't even know to ask the questions. They don't know the legal implications of a marriage. And therefore they're not protected because they go into it and everything is fine. And then when certain things starts to happen, they, don't even have any sort of clue what's going on, if it's healthy, if it's okay and normal, and what their rights are, what a marriage even means. And they start to ask that, I think, a bit after the fact, if there are issues there. Would you agree with that?
No, I would definitely agree with that. Just to touch on everything that you just mentioned, I think one of the things that I find with a lot of my clientele is that now you either have a couple coming in or their parents coming in with a very short-term marriage, or it's a long-term marriage where finally, the last shoe dropped. You don't have people so much in the middle, 10, 15 years who are coming in and saying, I fell out of love. It's usually something right at the beginning or after a certain amount of time. I also find that probably the biggest reason for divorce is an undiagnosed mental health issue with one party. A lot of mental health issues won't come out or won't become prevalent until stressors enter a relationship. And kind of going into what you were talking about, how look, when you're getting married young and your parents are supporting both sides at the beginning, you have so many hands helping you and carrying you through it that you may not be prepared, or the relationship might be very different when reality hits. For example, and I'm not saying this in any way to endorse dating in the secular world the way it is, because I think it has a lot of pitfalls, but if you are 25 in New York, you've got a job, you're dealing with that stress, your boss, that work-life management, and then you're dating somebody who's also in a similar situation. When you get married, you both experience that dynamic of the work life, the home life, and that's not so abrupt. Versus if you've been supported by your parents, then you start having children, and then somebody starts working, and slowly the financial support leaves. Now you're facing a lot of stress, and you're facing a lot of a different dynamic, and people act very differently when they're under stress and when they're in different situations. It's easy to have a great relationship when life is easy for you.
Or when you're going out for dinner once a week.
Exactly,
again,
going out, you're
looking
seeing
in each other's eyes,
exactly.
And you don't see the prep of that, and you don't see the aftermath of that.
Absolutely.
You see the candlelight dinner, and that's all that you see.
Definitely.
That's like more like the dating and the
the courtship,
the obsession part. That's not like
that's not real life,
or marriage or unity, so to speak.
Right. And just touch on the mental health aspect. You also won't capture a lot of that gets triggered from stressful situations. Also, a lot of it becomes more prevalent as you get older. When you hit your 30s,
Right.
late 20s, that really comes in. So it might come as a big surprise to a lot of people from that respect. In terms of just a straight legal perspective, to give a general overview of the law, it's simply that up until chuppah, everything that you own, everything that you've made, everything that you've acquired is your separate property. From chuppah until somebody starts an action for divorce, that's the marital pot, and those are the assets which are subject for distribution. Okay.
Yeah.
Now there are circumstances where if you've taken some of your premarital money, your separate property, and commingled it, for example, used it to create a joint account or buy a house together, it can be kind of transformed into marital property. But New York is a state where we believe in separate property and marital property, and the marital property is what's up for division.
Division. Wow. Okay. So do you feel like what I feel is that when I talk to people about this issue, people don't really understand the law and the legal implications of a marriage, and they can be super blessed and never have to know about these types of things. But then there are people who don't know about anything, and it's very easy to trick or manipulate them, if they're in a position where they don't have the information or the knowledge.
Sure. I mean, let's begin with this, and I think this comes up so much in my practice. I would say 95% of my clients are Orthodox Jewish. I'd say maybe 70% Hasidic. So I'm dealing with these issues every day. Number one, you are married whether or not you went to City Hall and got a marriage certificate if you had a chuppah in New York State.
People don't know that.
That is a legal
Let's say
marriage.
that again.
Yeah. It's a legal, chuppah gets you married.
Yes.
A get doesn't get you divorced.
Right.
So we have people all the time where they go and give a get, they remarry, now they're having problems with the second marriage, and I'm asking them about their first marriage, and I said, my first question is, do you have a legal divorce? And they said, no, why did I need one? We never went to City Hall. So now it's interesting because that means their second marriage wasn't a legal marriage, because that's bigamy, that's a second marriage. So they could annul that marriage, which has implications on that second spouse, but the implications of still being married to somebody else is usually tied to if you're sick, if you're in the hospital, technically your wife is that person who you thought you divorced. In terms of if you were to, God forbid, pass away, and you think that everything that you don't make a will, and you think everything is going to go to your new wife, well, she's not your new wife. Your new wife is the person who you gave a get to but never bothered divorcing. So it's very important for people to realize in New York, and this isn't in every state. In Florida, this is not the case. You have to get a legal marriage. But if in New York State you have a chuppah ceremony, it meets the requirements of a legal marriage.
Wow.
Okay, that is
fine.
really a lot of very important information. We talked about this before.
Yeah.
That is something that I think in the Jewish community people do not realize, because I get this question a lot. Well, I'm not married legally. I'm only married through a chuppah, and I'm not going to be able to get anything. He told me, because we're not married legally, I can't get anything.
So people are afraid.
So that's absolutely false. The other thing people have to realize, and it's worth noting, is that just because an asset, so we talked about what's the marital pot from chuppah onward.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a bank account be in both your names for it to have equal rights to both of you when it comes to a divorce. Because it was acquired during the marriage, the title doesn't matter. You could buy a house in one person's name, title won't matter. One thing I would warn a lot of people about, this comes up all the time. New couples get married, want to buy a house, buy a condo, and they can't meet the mortgage requirement. And so they need to get either buy it in a parent's name or have a parent go on the deed or whatever maybe.
That happens a lot.
That has an implication in the divorce, because come the divorce, who owns the house? The husband owns half, his parents own the other half. So that means you're fighting for half of a half.
Wow.
Okay, so if you're going to have parents get involved and be on the deed, you want some kind of formal acknowledgement that they're holding it in trust for you, for the couple. If that's not the case, there is an action your attorney could file. It's called for constructive trust, meaning you don't have a legal trust, but you want the court to say, essentially the way the people operated, this 50% share in this property was being held by the parents for the couple. But that means you're now including your in-laws as part of your divorce action. It's very expensive. It's a mini trial in itself.
Right.
So you should know right off the bat.
It's good to know this beforehand.
Parents, everybody wants to help at the beginning. I don't think people are doing it, with forthright, maliciously. They're trying to help you. But come divorce, I promise you, they're going to be claiming that half of the house is theirs.
Yeah,
For
and
sure.
I've seen that quite
So
often,
you should
I'm sure.
definitely just keep that in mind to do that. The other thing is you have so many family businesses in the Jewish community that, again, when we're thinking about a couple, title doesn't matter. But if he owns a business, but it's all in his brother's name, come the divorce, you're not getting any of that business.
But if the business is under his name, and then
then it's not so much of an issue. But I'm just saying, there's so much placing assets in family members' names at different times when it's convenient that can muddy the waters. So you're always, look, not that anybody should go through their marriage putting aside pieces of paper and collating, a folder, but keep it in mind.
It's good
and
to have
if your
information.
relationship is healthy, your spouse will respect your concern, and it's simple as just signing a piece of paper. I'm going to use a legal term of art. Anything you sign as a couple must be notarized in the form of a deed, okay, for it to be a binding contract. So if he goes and writes to you, I'm giving 75% of the house to the love of my life, Hani, that doesn't matter unless it's notarized in the form of a deed. That doesn't mean just a notary stamp. It's actually a little paragraph that you would, when I say in the form of a deed, because when you buy a house, that's the same type of deed that you would have, the notarization page. So just keep that in mind. Written agreements are not going to be binding unless properly notarized.
Where would somebody go for that? Let's say to get
forms online, any divorce attorney would know, but it's kind of like a block, and it says, I don't know the language off by heart, but on this day, 30th day of January 2020, appeared before me, X, Y, and Z, and I know that person because they provided sufficient proof. It's got a little bit of a paragraph to it versus just affirmed before me on this day in a stamp.
Right.
Okay?
Wow.
So that's what makes a binding marital contract. All prenups, if your prenup isn't signed that way, it's not valid.
Yeah.
If you had a postnup, it's not valid. If you have I know we're going to touch on this later, but if you have, for example, a prenup regarding the get, if it's not notarized the same way, it's not going to be valid unless it's done. So just keep that in mind.
Explain what a postnup is, because I think that there are a lot of people who are married.
It's essentially a prenuptial agreement for after you've gotten married already.
Right.
So you would address how you would divide properties, how you give monies, but you've already been married.
Yeah. So basically that is a good thing, I think, to do, not even if you're questioning, whether or not you're going to stay with that person, but just to know that there's a measure of safety.
Absolutely.
And
so
when you're with a spouse who's healthy, I think that, you can have that conversation, and you know that you're in a healthy relationship if you can kind of bring that up and feel safe to bring that up.
That's why I wanted to explain that, because people are like, oh, well, I didn't get a prenup, and is it too late? No, it's never too late.
Yeah.
Because you can always go and do this and have this conversation and be like, I would just because it's a crazy world, and like anything can happen. And even if your marriage is good, especially if your marriage is good, your partner should be able to give you that security and be like, okay, this is what you need. I can respect that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that our marriage is in trouble. It just means that things happen in life.
Exactly. And I think that what is the Jewish word for this? If you think that you're an exception, there's like a parable, you can never think that you're like an exception.
I don't know. Don't ask me to quote like what I learned in school.
Someone here who's watching will probably understand what I'm saying, but that's where all of like the problems lie when you exclude yourself. You should always think that I'm part of the general rule. I'm not an exception.
Really, like there's so many people who they had such good marriages and things like they never in a million years dreamed that this would be that.
And this wasn't to scare anyone.
No.
But just to know that, to get your information out there, to know, that it's okay to want that sense of comfort and security, even if you're in a good relationship. That doesn't mean that you're bad or wrong if you ask for certain
Right.
things to be
Well,
talked about.
This is
It's a
actually
conversation that's
going
good
to
to
talk
have.
about your needs. Like,
Yeah.
this is something that is one of your needs, and you need to have it met so that you have security in your relationship. That it's very valid, and it's something that you are allowed to ask for. And of course, it's never to scare. None of these conversations are to ever scare anybody.
Right.
It's only information, because information is power.
Exactly. And the more empowered you are, the more empowered your relationship is.
Absolutely.
So, and the better and stronger it is. Okay, Joel, next topic of conversation. Obviously, you have tons of clients who trust you explicitly, and you've done so much good work for so many. I wanted to know what goes into choosing an attorney, what goes into the process, how do you know if you're with someone who you can, feel comfortable with and know that they can, be the person that you need to support them through one of the most difficult times of their lives.
Right.
What are questions to ask, and what should you be looking out for in an attorney?
So I'll start off by kind of giving it from my perspective as the attorney, which is, I'm not making any general rules here. I think in terms of all the advice, everything I'm stating, I'm talking strictly about my personal experience as an attorney. And number two, I'm making general statements, giving general advice. You should not be taking anything I say thinking this will apply to you. Absolutely. Because your circumstances definitely may vary, and if you had come for a consultation, I would have asked you more questions than you would have asked me.
Yeah.
So number one thing I've noticed is that the cases that I'm the most successful on, I just find that I'm a great fit with my client. It's personality-wise, it does matter. I don't know, it changes the dynamic, it motivates you. So definitely, I know from my perspective, I don't want a client that I wouldn't go and have a beer with. Not to say that I only have male clients, definitely not, but
you could have a beer with a female
exactly.
client.
Joel.
Cocktails, whatever it may be.
Wine.
But you want to have that. I always tell people, I don't want anybody keeping information from me, because then I'm surprised in the courtroom.
Oh, that's a
and
very
that's
good thing
the
to point
worst
out.
thing ever. When I get that sinking feeling, when I know less than the other side knows about my client, it makes me distrust my client. I then don't know. You understand? I don't just represent great people. I've represented, in my opinion, some very questionable individuals, but you have a job, you have to be a professional about it. But if they have told me everything and they've been straight out and honest, that's the only way I can do my job. Number one, because I know then what to proactively have them be working on in their own life, because I feel like half my job is dealing with the things outside of the courtroom. More than, I would say 90% of my case is won outside of a courtroom. Because somebody comes in, they're honest with you, they tell you what they're doing. I'm giving them advice, I'm telling them, get this type of therapy, do this sort of class, get this type of training, change this behavior, move this schedule. Let's structure your life in a way to be successful. And it's not just to be successful in terms of, well, we're going to do better in court. No, this is how you're going to be successful in being a divorced parent. Because it's a different dynamic than if you're married and the things that your responsibilities are now versus later.
You're like a one-stop shop, basically.
Yeah.
Well, no, you see these, look, because I like to win, and I always, I have a term, one of my my associates here, and we always say, like, is this client a weak horse or a strong horse? And when they come in and they're a weak horse, we're thinking, we want to win. How do we get them up to speed to the other side that looks so put together?
Right. If I'm looking for a lawyer, that's what I would be looking at. I mean, don't call me a horse, because I won't take it.
Right.
But I want a lawyer who wants to win, because I know, like, it's not just about getting the money out of, like, dragging it on and getting the money out of it.
Let me also define winning, because I also think that matters. Look, every case calls for a different approach and a different attitude towards the other side. I have some cases I come out of where the other side thinks I'm literally the prince of evil, and the others where they think I'm the most collaborative attorney who's always looking for a settlement.
So you change your
absolutely, because if
if
somebody's coming at your client in a certain way, making false allegations, you have to be ready to put that person down. Versus, look, if a typical client comes in, my first advice is, well, first let's think about whether or not mediation is a good choice for you. because divorce is expensive. I always say either you have to be very rich or very poor, because if you're poor, you're getting free counsel. If you're very rich, the bills don't hurt. And I don't want to give somebody a bill that they can't pay, because then your client that isn't giving you information again, because they're thinking every time I call my attorney, it's going to cost me money.
Yeah,
so
true,
the case is slipping out of my fingers because the person can't afford, but now I'm the attorney on it, and am I going to win or am I not going to win?
Right.
So
you can't do half-half.
Exactly.
With
So
when
you
it
have
comes
to
to
have
court.
you have to have that full kind of dynamic.
Yeah.
So that's me. That's how I'm looking at my client. Is it someone I can work with? Also, there's the reality that sometimes clients can't pay. And my number one thing is this somebody who's been lying to me, not being truthful, not listening to my advice, and not look, I don't want to care more about your case than you. That's the biggest turn off to me. The moment I'm fighting and yelling at you on your phone.
It's actually codependency,
right,
by the way, just so you know.
Going and
that's
telling
my expertise,
you.
so that's
when I'm telling you better take that visit, and you're giving me excuses why you're not,
You're just
I'm
like,
losing
I can't.
my interest in
Right.
the case.
Yeah.
Now look, if I were to switch positions, just when I think about when I'm able to give good advice versus bad advice, and I think before we started filming, I gave an example. I might go into the example later on, but your circumstances in every single case and every aspect of the case determine which direction anybody should give you advice. Meaning there's no cookie cutter. Every case has so many moving parts: children, finances, in-laws, their health. So many different things can affect a decision. So I think the number one thing is that you want an attorney who's asking you questions. You have to feel like they got a good sense of what your life is, and because if they don't and they're just spilling out advice, you're either getting generic advice, which can be misleading, because they're just giving you kind of a script. And if they're giving you a script, that's not going to be so helpful. You think, oh, I came out with all this information, but it's not going to be any better than just listening to this podcast or stream,
or
because
going online
I'm just going online and reading. You need personalized advice, and so if you're not getting that, that's I think
that's very important. It's funny because just today I saw this in regards to coaching and therapy, and you could apply it to this too, of like
makeup also. I think that goes.
Don't mistake Instagram and social media and WhatsApp as counseling, and that could be for a lawyer too. Like, don't mistake Google as your lawyer, and if you're gonna go to a lawyer and he's gonna give you just a cookie cutter thing, it's basically the same information that you might find on Google.
Joel, so what I hear you trying to stress, I think it's very important for people to walk away with, is that when you find an attorney, the number one thing that you should look for is their open communication and dialogue and honesty. And
Absolutely.
If you have that, then you're in a better place. And if you don't, then you should be thinking, maybe this isn't the person for
I think
me.
even if I were to kind of switch my position, you want someone who you feel comfortable with having that. I mean, I think I've learned to, as I've gained more experience, make people more comfortable. Certainly when you have, again, I represent tons of women, tons of men. I'm not one side or the other, but it took time for me to understand how to talk to a victim of domestic violence.
Right.
Because I did not experience it. I don't have that history. I don't have that. But I think after having done trials and you've heard the stories and you understand the different types of abuse and the nuances, it makes you more sensitive, and hopefully when somebody comes to me, they pick up that I'm getting it.
Right.
So if you're in front of somebody who is being overly dismissive of whatever it is that you're saying, now again, they might be dismissive in that they're trying to explain to you that there's no legal consequence to what your concern is, meaning that because you feel this way doesn't mean it's going to change the outcome.
Right, which is something that I want to talk to you about.
Don't mix the two up, but you want someone who you feel you can walk in, say the bare naked truth, things that you're not telling your parents. And I've had that happen a lot, especially in the Orthodox world. You have a young client come in, their parents are trying to manage the case, and so many times I'm saying, okay, now it's the time, parents, you leave. And as soon as they leave, I go and tell the client, who's usually a very young man or woman, all right, tell me all the things you didn't feel comfortable saying in front of them.
Yeah.
And then, it really changes at that point.
Yeah, 100%. So about the abuse side, how do you identify? Is there anything in common with people who you've had as a client who have been abused? Anything that makes you feel like, okay, this is something that they're going through. I know how they, maybe don't feel as safe or have more questions or are more in doubt of themselves. Do you kind of have like a common thread that you can kind of give us to kind of know on the other end what it's like to, from your shoes, what you pick up on and how you deal with that differently?
Right. I mean, so look, this part of the conversation I think isn't so much from a legal perspective. It's just my experience perspective. Right. I find that, and I also want to point out that everything we're saying is actually gender neutral.
Yeah,
I know
absolutely.
that we're going to be, because I have so many male clients who could listen to everything that you have been putting out.
I know. They've reached out to me as well.
Oh, really?
Yes.
And
yes.
relate to what you're saying. And a lot of people roll their eyes. Oh, a man can be abused. But
yes,
a lot
heck
of the
yeah.
things.
Yes, they can.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But if I keep using pronouns where I'm referring
Don't worry,
to.
we understand.
No, I actually wanted to say it also.
Yeah.
Because, like, whenever we talk about it, it is, I think statistically it's more likely that a woman will be the abused one, but whenever we say woman and we're talking about an abuse victim, it doesn't necessarily have to be. I think that is important to say. It's just statistically it is more likely, but
I think
men.
There's like an 80%.
I think it's 80% too. That's actually the number that I was thinking also. I think it's like 80% women and but there are men. And if you're a man seeing this, you can just reverse the roles.
Right.
That's it.
So I think it falls into different categories. One is when you're with a spouse who has a personality disorder. Mm-hmm. Living with them is, again, I'm not using legal terms of art here, but I would call it's a form of abuse.
It is.
Not something that you could go to court and get an order of protection over.
Right.
It's different than somebody striking you or repeatedly demeaning you and that sort of thing. But when I feel that you are a victim when after a while you essentially have been beaten down and you're just submitting to things because you don't want to stir the dragon.
When you're walking on eggshells.
Walking on eggshells.
I was just going to say,
That's definitely, somebody comes in and is describing about, that type of life where just, I'm pushing them, I'm prodding them, like, why would you allow that to happen? Why would you allow that to happen? And the constant response is, I just didn't want to deal with the consequence. Yeah. In my head, that's, abusive relationship. Another pattern I see is when there is a gender bias, I would say. You don't see it so much where you have maybe an unemployed wife versus an employed husband, but I find that when men generally do not have, are not gainfully employed, for whatever the reason may be, if the other spouse, their wife, is very successful, there's a built-up resentment which they act out in the way that they treat their spouse. Yeah. I have so many successful women come in, and I'm just thinking, like, what is the pattern here of what's going on? And it's usually that imbalance. And not to give anybody excuses or whatever it may be, but you just see that there's clearly an unhappiness internally with the husbands, and they're taking it out on either the kids and wife or just the wife. Usually it's just the wife, and they cleave to the children and try to replace that emptiness of not having that fulfillment that maybe an average person gets from their job, from getting fulfillment from being with their kids and helping with homework and whatever. And those are the parents who, frankly, when you get into a divorce situation, they're the ones who say, I want 50-50 custody. Because, look, somebody who's working full-time, successful, they don't have time for 50-50 time.
I do see this a lot, like where people are, where the husband is not, employed and the woman is, and he would use it against her in the sense of well, I'm the primary caregiver, and I'm the one taking the kids to the doctor, and I'm the one at the school all the time, and you're so busy working, so I'm going to come after you for custody.
Right, but I think the only thing I would take issue with is that I don't think they're coming after. You wouldn't say that a wife is coming after the husband for custody if the husband was working all the time and it was the wife
Right,
at
so
home.
maybe the terms.
Because you have the presumption that
Yeah.
the children should be with the wife. So I always say this, when I'm faced with that, the first thing I say to my client is, well, is he doing a good job? Right? Because if he's saying I want custody and he's saying I'm super dad and that's why, well, first let's just say, well, is he doing a good job?
Right. I also think it also
Because-
depends on how it's being presented. Because if there's a difference
I agree
when you
with
are
that.
in an abusive,
Fine, I agree with
emotionally
that.
abusive relationship, there's a lot of threats that are very subtle.
Right.
So when I said using it against me, let's say I'm thinking of specifically what we were talking about before, if you're with somebody who, let's say, has a personality disorder, right? Or something like that, they will use it as a threat or as leverage. I heard a case, let's say, where the husband basically said, either give me 50-50, because he wasn't working and she
Right.
was working, either give me 50-50 custody or I'm coming after you for child support and alimony. That is using it against her. That's,
Well, look, again, dial it back and let's spread out the issues,
Mm-hmm.
right? Number one, I don't have any issue with a husband wanting 50-50 time. So depending on the age of the children.
Right.
I'll preface
I
it
agree
by
with
saying
that.
that. But if somebody is available, I always think it's better a parent taking care of a child than a caretaker.
Yeah.
Because if the wife is the one working
course.
and she's not available to be home, what's wrong with if the children go to the
As
husband?
long as it's a safe environment,
Right.
which we discussed already.
And that's why I always say, so is he doing a good job?
Yeah.
You know, if he's doing the homework and everything, then it's more about, and this is about going past kind of the social norms, which in the, I would say the religious community, because if you step outside and you're in a more secular environment, I think there is a little bit still of the bias, but not as much. There's more acceptance of that a husband can be an equal
Good
co-parent.
father.
Yeah.
And I think people have to view it this way. Stop thinking about child support, because the amount of money you're going to make from not having to be home and
right.
giving child care, you're going to make enough
Yeah.
even if you had a child support obligation. Don't not work to not pay child support. You're going to be making much more by doing that.
Absolutely.
And I think it's about ego, and everybody still
Exactly,
has,
and
even
power.
if power, and also feeling like there's gender roles, and people are going to think that I'm not as good of a mother, and
Oh,
somehow
yeah.
it's an affront on my, my maternal instincts if somebody goes and says, oh, your husband has 50-50 custody, what's wrong with you
It's
as a
more
mother?
like a slight.
Right.
Exactly,
Yeah.
it's
No,
a
so if
slight.
he's a good father and all
Yeah,
that
and
kind of
there's-
stuff, of course,
You should embrace
that
it.
it's a,
You should
absolutely
absolutely
well,
embrace it.
and obviously when you're going through a divorce and you have kids
Right.
involved, the nicer you guys can be, the better you guys can coexist and co-parent together,
Right.
the healthier and happier your child is going to be. At the end of the day, that's, I think, a disclaimer that we should
Right.
put.
But I also think people need to take a step back, because it's funny, and it's a joke I always say to all my clients. If I were God forbid going through a divorce and I wanted to punish my wife, the way I would do it is I would say, I'm seeing the kids every other weekend, you're stuck with them for the next. Because
That's not usually what happens though in
but what I'm
divorces.
saying is that when you're married, everybody is fighting for their personal time. I want time to go to the gym.
Right.
I want time to hang out with my friends. But suddenly you're going through a divorce and you're taking on more than you're going to want. You're going to need a break. You're going to be a
Right, but
single
I will
parent.
tell you, I will actually speak to this because what generally happens with the case is in the beginning, because everybody's so
Right.
hurt and angry and everything, there are men and women who use the kids as pawns in a very unhealthy way. This is not gender,
Right.
biased. And then, this is while the divorce is going on. Then after the dust settles and everything is, and there's an agreement in place and everything is like fine, then what you just said comes into play of, what do you mean? It's your weekend. What do you mean you're not? Like, I
Right.
like seeing text messages. What do you mean it's your weekend? How could you not take the kids?
Yeah.
I need a break. I can't do everything on my own. That's when they contemplate. So it is a lot about
You have
ego
to
and,
think more long term
Right.
than short term.
But
but
this
it
is
is
my-
hard because tensions are high and there's emotions, At the end of the day, people are not getting divorced because everything has been peachy,
Right.
There's
I definitely agree with that, and that's why my first thing that I always tell clients is, if they're asking for more visitation, don't fight it. You fight it, and they're gonna want more because they think you're taking something from them.
Exactly.
Experiment a little. Give them as much as they can, because more likely than not, they're not going to be able to handle it, and they'll dial it back themselves.
Right.
They
But
will
that's
dial it back
actually what I
themselves.
meant also when I said like using it against it. Is sometimes I've seen this also where the parent, any parent, doesn't necessarily really want 50-50. They just
Right.
want to win. And
Yes.
that is when it's a problem. So I actually have said that to people. I'm like, you know what? Like I said this to women, especially like he says he wants 50-50 and you feel like he's using it against you.
Right. Give it
him
to
the
him.
kids. See what happens.
See what happens.
And see what happens. And generally speaking, if the father or the mother or whatever, if they're a great parent and they're whatever, then it's great for the kid. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's healthy for the
I agree
child.
with that.
And if not,
This actually
then
goes
they'll come out.
into a question that I was actually asked. What would happen if, as a kind of punishment, I would say, for not paying alimony or giving any kind of financial gains that, let's say you were owed or promised or felt like you withhold the children? What would you say
So,
about
I'll
that?
answer that first from a legal perspective, which is there's no connection between the two. You're behind on your child support. That's not a basis legally
You're not
for me
paying
to go.
to see your child.
Right. It's not a basis for me legally to file a motion and say he didn't pay child support, he doesn't get a visit.
I think it's very, very important to stress because
Yeah.
sometimes people do use that as leverage.
Right.
Well, I'm not letting you see the kids because
Right.
you didn't pay.
But
And it's
I
very
even
damaging.
go further. When I have a male client come in, I love it when the female client is doing that because I'm thinking she's making my case.
Right.
So
There's
easy,
nothing
yeah.
more damaging to your case than playing with your kids. So that's the legal perspective. On a non-legal perspective, if I'm representing the wife, I always say, like, take it all aside. Is that what your kids want?
Right.
You know they want to see their father. So what you're doing is now you're demonstrating to the court that you're putting, and it's not to diminish or in any way excuse the fact that he's not
behavior.
supporting
Right,
his
of
children
course.
and the stress. And I also sympathize. I understand. Look, you're supporting the kids. You're the single parent. You're the one carrying all the burden. He's wheeling in on the weekend and gets to take them to Kids in
Disneyland
Action
dad.
or whatever
That's
it
what
may
I
be.
call it.
Yeah.
Disneyland dad.
But you are hurting your kids when you do that, and the right way to deal with it is drag him back to court.
Right.
And there are remedies for
Yeah.
people who don't pay child support. There
Yeah.
are strong remedies.
And New York, they made
and
them
that's when you
even
do it.
stronger in the last few years. I think they take away like their license. Like there's a
But
lot.
yeah,
of,
I mean, their driver's licenses will be suspended, then passports get suspended.
Right.
They freeze
So
bank accounts.
is-
You can go for imprisonment. There are a lot of.
there is
there's
a
lot of
system in
things.
place. I will say that in my experience with, not personally, but other people I've dealt with who've gone through the child support services, it's the system over there.
Right.
They really do have this part
Right.
like on lockdown.
Let's say the husband works off of the books. That's also
Yeah, that's a
question
really
again.
big question.
Or the wife,
So look,
and
it's.
it's child support. So.
Look, working in the Hasidic community on the level that I do, it's more often than not off the books, cash,
Yeah.
and.
And I just want to be
something-
open and honest here.
Yeah.
I don't
Right.
want to hide anything.
No, no,
here,
so
because-
listen,
No, it's
the
very
short-
important. because
Yeah.
Women are scared
Right,
to
so
leave
look,
because of this
number
reason.
one,
Yeah.
the vast majority of the judges in, I would say New York, Kings County, even Rockland County, you're
They're
not the
familiar.
first Hasidic,
Yeah.
client to walk in from
Yeah.
Borough Park and say, my husband makes money. They know this.
Yeah.
They know it happens. So how do you prove it? Well, the same way the court would look at it. What are your expenses? Because if you're saying he says he makes $15,000 a year, but tuition is $20,000 a year for your 5 kids, plus he went to Uman and Israel, and
Joel, you're awesome.
all the different places that they go to, you can pop that bubble very easily by documenting a few minor things.
Yeah.
Your rent's $3,000 a month. You're not making rent if you're making $20,000 a year.
Yeah. So,
Not possible.
So they shouldn't be scared. There
Right.
are ways that
There
your
are definitely
attorneys
ways,
can.
and the way you should be looking at is document your expenses. Unless you have debts that match your expenses, every dollar you spent you had made.
Right.
If it's not on a credit card, you had the money. So just document, make a journal of what you're spending money on, how much you spend at the grocery, the tutors, the gas, all of that, and now you have, you can walk into court, put together a nice motion. It's the best thing. You walk into your attorney's office, say, look, I have the whole thing. And yeah, it's not the same as a receipt, maybe, but you know,
It's credible enough.
it's a sworn affidavit that's detailed, and you're saying all these things. And is he going to deny that the kid's getting piano lessons at an hourly rate more than what he's making in a day? Right? So don't get, you know, sometimes when people think about, oh, the prospect of getting divorced, you overwhelm yourself.
Absolutely.
So break it down. Number one, child support. How am I going to prove we make this much money? Well, we're spending it.
Yeah.
And if he's not smart, or she's not smart, they're putting it on a credit card. Well, that's the easiest thing to prove it on. Now you just need your credit card bill. And even if they have the credit card bills, your attorney can get a hold of them.
So that's important also because
Absolutely.
there's a lot of women or men, again, in this situation where they have no access to financials whatsoever.
Doesn't matter. So number one, I'll give everybody a quick tip. If you are filing a joint tax return, even if your spouse is never giving you the tax return and he's just making you sign it, you can go onto the IRS's website and use your social and your address, and they will send you a transcript of every tax return. You can get faxed to you or emailed to you right away, or emailed to you or mailed to your house. You can get a hold and see what's on the actual tax return.
That's so important.
Very, very easy to do. Very, very easy to take care of. Fast, easy, quick. Otherwise, I mean, you know what's being spent. You look around the house. You know how much is being bought for clothing.
Yeah.
Just keep a tally of it. Now, look, if there are debts, then, well, guess what? You've been living beyond your means, and the reason why you're not going to get a lot in court is because he wasn't making that much money, or she wasn't making that much money in the first place. And people have to realize the hard reality of divorce is this. You don't have the synergy of one home, one rent, one con ed bill, one grocery bill. Divorce is expensive.
Yeah.
And again, I just want to give it from the men's perspective as well. They're now covering all these expenses, plus child support, whatever it may be, tuitions. It's hard for both of you.
Absolutely.
It's definitely hard for both
parties.
parties.
I mean, both parties, I mean, they're talking about, again, like you said, if someone's not really, really rich or really, really poor.
It's hardest on the middle class.
Right. It's really, really hard. People go into debt and they get, and divorce is it's considered a life-altering event.
I think it's one of the biggest things. There's death and divorce that are the biggest.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, a marriage that's bad, you know, and you feel unsafe in any way, shape, or form.
Look,
divorce is a way better option for your kids and for yourself.
I think you're touching on something. You know, it reminds me of a phone call I got the other night. 11 o'clock, I get a phone call from a rabbi. He's telling me his sister's outside of the house, and there was an incident. I asked about the incident. It wasn't something that I think if you told a regular lay person what had happened, that they would say, oh, call 911. But I said to him, your sister is standing outside her house and she doesn't want to go back in. That kind of says enough. There's a lot more to whatever happened, and I think, and you'll probably speak to this more than I will, but I always see there's going to be a breaking point for everybody where, you know, everybody's doing that calculus in their head. All the things that I have now, which are essentially more material, that I'm going to have to give up. But
your status in the community, you know, your kids' potential mates or should have been, and people are thinking, oh my gosh, my house, my ring, my whatever.
The alternative is you're basically setting, well, it's your sanity, and people have to realize this. And I see the pattern. I mean, I look much younger than I actually am. Okay, I'm 38, but I have done divorces of individual. I've done the second divorce, and I've heard about their parents' divorce and what the atmosphere in the home was, whatever it may be. You're giving the worst model for your children what a healthy relationship is when you stay in that. I see it. Well, this is what, you know, happened to my mother. I see it. Everything that happens to somebody's mothers or fathers, they're doing the same thing.
It's like, so history does repeat itself because we repeat cycles, because at the end of the day, when we're wounded as children and we see these type of things happen, it causes wounds. Right. So when we see these wounds, we just continue them because we're trying to heal them. Like, there's a lot of psychology behind it, what you're saying. So you're seeing the pattern as a lawyer, and I can attest to the fact that it's an actual pattern that happens in your subconscious that you can try so hard to fight it, but unless you are getting real help and doing real work, it's very, very, very hard. So you're not, I just wanted to also like say something that you said, you're not saving your kids by staying in a marriage that is toxic. You are hurting them more than you could imagine. And I hear this a lot from people also, where like, I'm staying for my kids. My kids are healthy. They don't know what's going on. It's not true. You think they don't know, your kids feel everything. They might not know the specific, the details, they might not see the abuse in live, but your kids feel you. We are all energetically connected to our children. It's just life. And when you're not happy to the point where it's toxic and there's abuse going on, they know. And staying in that marriage, like you said, is just going to make them repeat the same cycles. You're not doing your kids a favor. That's really what I want to stress.
They're going to think, oh, if my mom stayed,
then
like,
I should stay.
I can stay too.
Yeah,
and we see that a lot, especially in more of a religious community and circles, that it becomes a norm. Okay, I want to, we're saying a lot of amazing things, but we haven't really touched on the get yet and how important that is and what you can tell us. You know, a lot of people have reached out to me, you know, let's say he doesn't give me a get, he's saying that he's going to use that as a bargaining chip. Is there a way to get a get from someone who, you know, doesn't want to give it? What do you think about prenups? You know, all of that stuff. Do they really work?
Okay.
How can we make this a thing that, you know, obviously it's a very one way kind of a system in the Jewish community. You know, we can argue the morals of that and whatever later, it doesn't matter, but I'm just saying in practical terms, how can we make this work?
So look, I think the first thing I would say, and look, it's easy for me to say it, number one, because I'm male, and two, like I can't really relate to it, you know, in any personal way. I've never had a family member go through this, but
I'm sure your clients have.
They have, and the first piece of advice I think everyone should know is this. This is a negotiation. If you're in business and you want to cut a deal, there's a negotiation. If you see that the other side wants something really bad, what are you going to do? You're going to negotiate for it. So my first piece of advice to everybody is, don't open your mouth about the get. Why is it that the first time you separate, your parents are calling up the other side and saying, when are we setting up to get? What are we setting up to get? I have done cases where I've told my client, and it's only the disciplined clients who have listened, but it's paid dividends. He wants to get remarried too. He wants to, again, this is for the general kind of scenario, not somebody who is off the derech and is sleeping around, whatever, but the guy wants companionship as well, wants to move on in his life. Don't think that because I know that conceptually, you already feel the noose around your neck and they're holding the other end of the string.
Yeah.
But they also want out.
It's the fear,
exactly.
I think, that gets in the way.
But you need to control it, because if you stay completely quiet, you never mention it, and you just treat it as, we will talk about everything, and if you leave it till the very end, and of course, when we sign the papers, we'll do the get, it kind of just falls into place. I've had cases.
Saying, don't even make it a bargaining chip.
Yeah, you're making it a bargaining chip.
Don't even make it a bargaining chip.
You're making yourself such an easy prey. I've had clients who have stayed completely quiet. What happened in the middle of the case? The husband started saying she doesn't want to get from me, and all of a sudden she's sitting in the power, and everyone thinks, oh, the rumor starts going around. Rumor starts going around. She's a lesbian. She's hanging with that girlfriend in Borough Park. Blah, blah, blah. So now we really need to get the get from her, because she's never going to want to get from him.
That is amazing.
And it goes on, and then next thing you know, I'm negotiating.
You're like,
you want her to get what you get?
So
amazing.
Look,
great.
That's brilliant.
And look, the problem is, and I think a lot
this
of
is why you need a good lawyer.
A lot of attorneys make
exactly
this mistake, and I'm not trying to attack. There are organizations that give free legal services, and they've championed this issue. I've championed the issue, but I think you have to play it. When you go in the first day in court and you're saying, we asked for a get and they're not willing to give it, now I just know. I mean, the judge can't give you a get. There's separation of church and state, and now you've made yourself a sitting duck, you know, and you're building the anxiety in your head.
Wow.
Again, you hear about all the extreme cases. But in 99.5% of the cases, when the case is over, there's always going to be the get. Okay? It's when you start saying, we're in the middle of the court case, I want my get, that you're kind of ramping up the issue. Look, sometimes it works. You'll get your get ahead of time, and I've had a lot of men who will give the get before we even go to court, and they remarry, and they move on, and they're happier for it.
Right.
And they always are like, it was the best thing I ever did. I'm remarried. I could only go through the divorce with the support that my spouse is giving me. But so in terms of advice, unless you're dealing with like a true believer, someone who has nothing to lose, has no will for life, is not working, doesn't want to remarry, it's not something you need to necessarily worry about.
Right.
The guy you need to worry about is the one who is is on their third marriage. You had made a mistake marrying him. He's judgment proof, doesn't really work, like a real loser, okay? Is the one who's going to try to get something out of it.
Isn't respected.
Someone who's not going to listen, doesn't belong to a community with a rabbi where if he, is getting barred from an aliyah, whatever, it's going to matter. So it's, again, you're hearing about it all the time. I'm telling you, I've had massive cases that have been in the newspapers about this.
Yeah.
I've had those type of clients where we go to the extreme, and there are some tools, and I don't want to go too deep into it because it's so case specific.
Right.
But I would say New York has a get statute which says that if you're the plaintiff, meaning you take the other person to court, you must remove all the barriers to remarriage. So what that means for you is if your husband files for divorce, you don't need to worry about the get. He must give you the get to get his divorce.
I think this is more when the woman is, and I think the best piece of advice that you've given on this issue is you should not make it into a bargaining chip.
Exactly.
Don't even. Yeah.
No, I wanted to something just came into my head. We didn't discuss it beforehand, but what is your thoughts and opinions on the based-in versus going through the court system?
Well, listen, I think in almost all my cases, I'm juggling both at the same time, and I think based-ins can be very helpful because they're so settlement-oriented. They don't actually want to go and hear the whole case and give a decision. Even when they've heard the whole case, they're pushing everybody in the direction of having a settlement. And it's good to have the community involved because if it is going to be a get refuser type case, having the Bezdin involved does have its advantages. The one thing I would say is get proper legal advice on this because to go to Bezdin, you must sign an arbitration agreement. Okay? You cannot get out of that agreement. What that means is you're saying they will determine all the financial aspects to your case. And now look, for a vast majority of clientele who don't have sophisticated income or assets or whatever it may be, that's fine. You guys are both making a little bit of money. They say you pay $100 per child per week. They're not even they're on a different track and system. And they say, father has obligation to educate their children under Torah, so father pays 100% of tuition. But but there are some Bezdins and there are some rabbis. I'll just throw one name out. Rabbi Bergman is very sophisticated. Deals with high net worth cases. Works in the city. You just have to be in the right environment because the moment you sign that arbitration agreement, you are locked.
Right.
Whatever they decide.
My heart sinks when somebody walks into my office and says they've signed an arbitration agreement because I'm now powerless. I can't go to court and ask for child support. You said you were going to do it in front of a bet-din who...
There's no way to undo it. It's legally binding.
The only way is if it's not notarized in the form of a deed, and if you participated enough...
Basically, you guys should know.
Be careful. It's a big... Just don't do it flippantly.
Yeah.
It's also, I think, like...
And you have to know which Bezdin you're going to.
Right. So every Bezdin is very different. There are some Bezdin who are, unfortunately, not necessarily pro-women, and there's a lot of other things that go in.
I think there is that perception that maybe the more Hasidish the Bezdin,
not even.
Okay.
I'm not even
I was
talking
gonna
about
say,
that. I just have some things in my head.
I'm always a little surprised at how, I would say this. In Bezdin, you are not entitled to spousal support.
Right.
Under Jewish law, there's no such thing as spousal support. There's child support. So in court, you can get spousal support and child support. But unless you're in a long-term marriage, you're not going to get that much spousal support for that much time. So you may have the advantage of being under the auspices of a Bezdin who can help you with the get if you're really worried about the get.
Right.
And tuition being expensive, you know that it'd be something that would fall on the husband if you were to go to the best.
Right, because the court system does not include tuition as part of like the
No,
child
it's
support.
an add-on. It absolutely is.
Okay.
They will deal with that, especially if the children have a history of going
Right.
to it. But if it's a newborn and nobody has
Right,
money,
right.
then it's a question.
So I mean,
one other thing I want to
say.
say: Besdins do not have jurisdiction in New York to handle any custody and visitation matters. They all do
That
it,
is very important
but
to know.
when you get the psak and the psak says the father, you're happy with the financial part, and then it says father gets 2 sleepovers a week, and you think the father's abusive. That's not even valid. Anything relating to custody and visitation is not valid in New York State.
I don't think a lot of people know
I
that.
don't think that a lot of people, I didn't know that till right now.
Only the financials, and even for child support, there are some regulations on how they have to structure their decision on that. So, but definitely seek advice before you
Right,
sign
so that's
up
what I want to tell you.
to
Like, if
that.
you're thinking of leaving a marriage, the first step is don't go to Basin, don't whatever, go talk to a lawyer.
Well, look.
Talk to Joel, actually.
No, look.
Just saying.
No, there are a lot of attorneys.
Hashtag just saying.
There are a lot of. I have a lot of colleagues who are, they have that same gamut of experience that I have. So it's not just me.
I know, but I think
but-
that you
So
have.
humble
I
too.
think that
Look at
you
that.
work for a lot of different people in our
just-
community,
let
and I
me-
think you know
let me-
the ins and the outs.
Let me also throw this out. There are Toans who
Yeah.
can be helpful.
Yeah.
Just the one thing I would say about a Toan is just understand that they are not lawyers. And Toans love to give legal advice because they're very cozy with we work with Toans all the time. So they'll absorb a lot of what we say, and they like to take our forms and say, we can do this for you. Just don't take legal advice
Is
from
that
a
like
Toan.
a mediator?
No, it's basically the equivalent of a lawyer in front of the Besdin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, and I wanted to actually get into the, you touched on it, or dropped on what you were saying, that if there's abuse and you go to, well, let's just say court, I did want to talk about the custody side of things when it comes to if you are in a abusive relationship and you're worried about the kids being abused, and then how do you handle custody?
Well, look,
What
I
do you
think
do?
that's where people are the safest. I think that's where the courts are so sensitive. Orders of protection are fairly easy to get. I think that when you go and get an order of protection, you should know that the first time you're in court, the other side's not there. So you have this huge advantage in that nobody's hearing their side of the story. They see just what you're saying, and they will issue a very serious order that's going to block this person under the threat of arrest from coming near you or your children.
What if they're not abusive to the children? That's the...
If under New York law, if the children were present, it's enough for them to be covered by your order of protection. I think they don't even need to have been present. You can still request, depending on the nature of the abuse towards you, that they be included in the order of protection.
That's very
Okay.
important. Yeah.
There'll be carve-outs for visitation and whatnot, but I think that's one area. Courts, even when you do divorce agreements, anything relating to the children and safety is not really ironclad because the court's always looking out for what's the kid's best interest.
Right.
So just because the two of you agree to one thing, if it turns out not to be so great for the kids, the court will change it. So orders of protection are definitely available. Just to clarify one thing, if you go and call 911 and they have sufficient cause for an arrest, the person's arrested, there's a criminal case, you will get a criminal court order of protection. Some people are not comfortable calling the police because it's mastering, and it comes with a big stigma, and it's this massive big thing, and you'll usually get a lot of sympathy for the other side because they can now fundraise all of a sudden because we have to get a Jew out of jail, okay? You don't have to go and call the police because you could go the next day to 330 J Street, the 6th floor. There's a petition room for people with no attorneys. Family court is structured really for people without attorneys. It's very navigatable. Go to the 6th floor self-help room. They give you a clipboard. You fill out your basic information. You wait in line. They will then have a clerk call you. The clerk will call you, and they will type all the papers for you. They'll put you in front of a judge. The judge will just say, is everything you wrote here correct and accurate? They may have 1 or 2 questions to see if what you're saying makes sense. And you'll get your order of protection. That's without an attorney, without incurring any costs. you can do that. People have to realize that a lot of what, anything relating to the children or safety, orders of protection, easy to go into court, and if you're low income, you'll be assigned a free attorney. And a lot of them are very experienced and very good. Okay, so that's number one. Don't let that be the reason why you don't go and get help, especially if you're facing domestic violence.
Yeah, so that's actually been something that can't.
Child support's the same thing.
Yeah.
People have to understand, family court is so easy to navigate without an attorney, because you file a petition. It's the same thing. You go, they give you a clipboard, you fill out some basic information, they do all the paperwork, they'll arrange for the sheriff to serve your spouse. You both appear on that day, and he has to, the judge is expecting that your spouse and you will turn over all your financial information, tax returns, W-2, pay stubs, and on the spot they're issuing child support orders. Now it gets more, if somebody is self-employed and it's a little bit more sophisticated of a case, you may want to look at hiring a private attorney. But also, those judges are not stupid. They can impute income. They can say, well, your expenses, your lifestyle is this much, and she's established it because I have all your bills, right? So we're going to give child support based off of as though you're making $50,000 a year rather than the $15,000 that you're saying you're making. Right. So people shouldn't be afraid of that. Number two, look, when it comes to legal advice, I always say a consultation is just consultation. You're not signing a retainer, right? Just come up with the consultation fee, go in, don't hesitate. It comes with no strings attached, and just pick an attorney's brain. There's no harm in it. The only thing I would say is when you get your advice, don't walk around acting like you just came out of an attorney's office. All of a sudden, spouses will come to me and say, yeah, I know my wife or my husband spoke to an attorney because all of a sudden they're doing this and all of a sudden they're doing that. And when you're writing emails, you're writing, well, it's in their kids' best interest that they go to my parents' house.
Speak the way you would normally.
Everything natural. It's information. I don't know what stage in your relationship you'd be doing it, but definitely you should treat it like if you were going to any professional and you needed some advice, it doesn't mean you're getting divorced.
Yes.
Right.
It doesn't mean that. And sometimes it's worthwhile to even tell the other side and say, look, we have this issue. We're about to buy a home. I want to make sure that in case anything goes wrong, since your parents are co-signing or taking on half the equity, that we do this in the way that protects my rights, since what we're doing might break it. And then you can just sign a post-nuptial agreement where you're saying, we're both acknowledging that although title is in both of parents' names and our name, that we are really the true owners, and have everyone sign it. You don't have to hide it necessarily all the time.
And in a safe relationship, this conversation should be able to be happening. I did want to, you talked about documentation as far as documenting bills and whatever. Now, if somebody is in a situation where they are being abused and they are not comfortable going to the cops yet or whatever, what's your opinion, your thoughts on documentation as far as that goes?
Definitely. Diaries, journals, you don't even need to do that. If you have an iPhone, you open up the Notes app and just say, this day, this time, came home and he threw a glass at the floor. Just keep it running.
And that is more of a relevant thing if there's kids as well.
Definitely, but even without kids, I mean, one thing I find is that people who are in really abusive relationships, they come in for the consultation. I see that they are damaged people, but they can't remember. They can't tell me what happened. I'm usually asking them to call a friend
because
who
the brain is so good at blocking out that information already.
But also because if they're in a situation where they're being there's gaslighting, then their spouse could convince them this didn't happen the way you remember. Right. There's a lot of that
especially
goes
if there's years and years of that.
Send yourself an email.
Well, what if somebody a diary or a journal would work too if somebody, let's say, has a spouse who goes through their phone? Or,
I like an email, or create a separate account that you send an email to.
Try to just keep documentation in any way, shape, or form. And the court will recognize any type of documentation.
Yeah, again, it's not that you come in with your journal and it's treated like gold, but it adds credibility. Your testimony as a person matters, and the more specific, the more believable. A person comes in and says, I want an order of protection. My husband's always verbally abusing me, and on one day he threw a glass. Versus, on or about January 3rd, I came home, he did this and that. On or about February 15th, this is what happened. I mean, now you've got this whole history. No one's sitting there and just making up.
Right.
Yeah,
You
and
know.
I think that would help you as a person as well.
Absolutely. That's
Oh,
a
for sure.
goal.
It would help
That's
your
the
own
easiest
brain.
easiest
Yeah.
case
That's
to,
for sure.
to deal with.
And that's a hard thing for people
It's
in
a very
relationships
hard
to
thing
do
to do,
because they're
yeah.
already so programmed to block it out, and they have such a level of stress, a biological rise in them of stress when they're going through a situation like this where they can't even use their whole brain
Well,
or
right, and
access
there's
their
also
entire brain.
they're used to covering it up because
Yeah.
most people who are in this type of relationships on the street or whatever, they're walking around like everything is hunky dory
Oh, yeah.
because they have to, you know.
Right.
And then there's a level of shame that happens. So when you're writing this stuff down, number one is it definitely is going to help you, especially when you go to
Yes.
therapy afterwards, to deal with these traumas that you've been through. And but more importantly, not more importantly, equally as important, in your court cases, like you said, because people are not generally making up dates and times and whatever, and you
Yeah.
you might forget, but that's why any type of record is so important.
One thing I'm gonna say is this, because I think so many of the questions you're giving me is people are afraid. They don't know what's the next
Yes,
step.
I think fear is the biggest thing.
But
fear of the unknown, fear of the payments, fear of what if my spouse gets really angry,
Right.
fear of the kids, all the things that he's, or she is using to threaten their spouse.
So I would
lot
say
of
this,
fear.
we've touched on a lot of these issues, but I also want to say that one thing I'm amazed by in that just seeing my clients is there are so many support networks out there.
Yeah.
There's sister to sister, there's Facebook groups. There's so many resources out there that you should not, nobody watching this should ever feel like they're the only one going through it.
Absolutely.
There
Right.
are,
We talked about that.
I
also,
get
yeah.
calls at least once a day. I could be having a new potential client. There are so many people going through this, and nobody should think at all that if they go through it, that number one, even the stigma, I question how much of a stigma anymore that there is. There's enough. There's a stigma, but there are enough people who are all walking around with the same, and it's becoming less and less of a stigma.
For sure.
Your kid is not going to be the only kid whose parents are divorced in his school.
And it's funny because I'm just gonna make a side comment on that is that people talk about this a lot. Like, all of a sudden in the last few years, therapy, coaching, people are talking about all their problems. We didn't have these problems growing up. First of all, yes, you did. You had them. We just didn't talk about them. And second of all, what I do believe that we are in the generation of healing and bringing up all these issues to the surface so that our kids can have a better life. And when it comes to shame, shame leads to addiction and to a lot of problems that we are seeing in the Jewish community now. And talking about these issues are so important, which is why we're here doing this also.
Right.
Yeah. I definitely think that that's an important thing to bring about is that, yes, we're not alone. And also, not only that, a woman or even a man who is in a situation where they were a victim of abuse, it does not make them weak. I think that some of your clients who are the most strong and on it and, whatever, are the ones who, unfortunately had this occur to them. And I think that a lot of times it made them even more powerful and self-assured and strong. And it doesn't mean that, if I get a divorce, that will be the end.
Right.
Definitely not.
There is life after divorce.
There is
Absolutely.
definitely. Yes. And yeah, I think you can definitely grow as a person from any experience.
Oh, absolutely. And then you could actually use it to help other people even. Like, there's so much out there. The people that I've seen that have done the most quality work in life are people who have been through these type of events, came out on the side, and then used their pain to help other people. And that's, actually the last stage of healing, they say, is when you've used your grief and your pain to help other people. I had a lot of women actually reach out to me who are post this, and they said, I wish that this conversation was going on when I was married because it would have helped me so much, and I am now also, motivated and inspired to take what I went through and talk about it. So you should just know that if you're going through it, yes, you're not alone, and a lot of strong people have gone through this type and worse. There's no shame, there's no embarrassment, and you can actually use this to really use your voice to help others.
And your attorney will understand and believe you.
Oh yeah, that's a big
definitely. And not only that, like the judge there's enough of a system there in place, I think, at this point You're not the only one this has happened to, and there is a lot of people who will believe you and will have your back.
Yeah, so that's
People are
another
afraid
thing
of
that's
that.
very important to mention, because when you are in that kind of relationship and someone's constantly telling you nobody's going to believe you, you're crazy, the gaslighting, the crazy making, no one's going to believe you, like, look at you, look at me, I'm so much more powerful, I'm so much more whatever it is they're telling you. A lot of people are afraid that nobody is going to believe them. The community, your lawyer, the judge is not going to believe them. I've heard people say, well, my spouse has more money, so they're going to get a better attorney, and he said or she said they're going to make me look so stupid and so crazy, and that is important. That your lawyer will believe you, your judge will believe you. There are people who will believe you.
If you go in there with an honest and open mind, and you're going to put your trust into this person's hands, which is the most important
One thing I would say is definitely, I think, everybody who would be going through it, especially someone who's a victim of abuse or in that type of relationship, something that's very, very important is, I think, you have to compartmentalize what divorce is, in terms of it's a courthouse, it's a courtroom, where you can address things that need to be addressed in that legal setting. But if you think that you'll find whatever peace and maybe more of a therapeutic side to this through the courts, it's not that judges don't believe or don't recognize this, it's that you have to understand the difference between a judge could go and find that the husband was the worst husband to you, but they're evaluating, but how good is he to the children?
Right.
Now, there is a correlation to, if you're a horrible, abusive husband, what really are you in terms of a parent? But I'm only mentioning this because too many times a client will come in and expect a result because of their experience, and they're not looking beyond it. You need to have a forum, which is not the courthouse or your attorney's office, but more of maybe a life coach, psychologist, therapist, good group of friends, where you're dealing with those issues, because it'll help you cope with the court case so much better.
I think they go definitely hand in hand.
The support system is very, very important, and something that I also tell people. They reached out to me, I can't afford therapy, I can't afford coaching, I can't afford this type of thing. I'm like, get yourself a really good friend who you can confide in and be like, tell everything to. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we should go into some questions now.
Yeah.
I think we actually covered a lot without even looking at the questions.
I think we covered a lot of the questions.
I think we did, exactly. So let me see if there's anything that I feel like we missed, and maybe we'll just take one or two, but I think we did touch on a lot of them. Okay, this person is separated, and basically she was told that she's not allowed to use his credit card anymore for anything, and that's what her legal rights are. She can't use his money. So what would happen in like a separation in terms of finances?
So look, just two parties separating, there's no legal effect to that unless you sign a separation agreement where you sign, I will only use my credit cards, he will use only his. You're still married. You could use his credit card, and there's nothing you can do about it.
And if he cancels them.
If he cancels it, he canceled it. Right. But then if he's not supporting you, not letting you use the credit card, well, then you're going after him for child support.
Right, exactly. Okay.
How important do you think that the separation agreement is versus just separating?
Well, no, separation agreement, stipulation settlement, these are terms we use. That's the document that encompasses the entire divorce settlement.
Well, I'm talking about like when people get legally separated, like
that's very rare. You're legally, those documents are executed. That's what settles your whole case. It's the divorce stipulation. We call it a separation agreement or stipulation settlement. It's your divorce agreement.
Okay.
Wow, we really, we covered a lot of these, honestly. One of the questions that I also find important is, what kind of prenup do you recommend, if you recommend any kind of prenup? Do you think that's important for most of the couples that you see? Anything that people should know who are going into a relationship? Obviously, go into it with, a positive outlook, but know what your rights are, know that you're safe.
Sure. So what I'll say about prenups is this. Number one, if you jog your memory back to the beginning. I said in New York, everything that you acquired before chuppah is your separate property. That's not the case in California. California is a community property state. So everything from before, after, it's all in one big pot. Okay? So New York law kind of has a built-in prenup. Okay? So a standard prenup for a first marriage would be to essentially just make sure that those lines can't be grayed out. Remember I said that the way you treat those assets that you earned before you got married can sometimes become marital. So the prenup would just make sure they can't become marital. Okay? That's dealing with that. Another thing in a prenup you would deal with is maybe spousal support. But that's just an equation at this point, right? In New York law, it's you plug in your income, their income, and it spits out the number. It's not so sophisticated. People who really need income prenups, I think, you have children and you're on a second marriage, because you want to make sure that your children are taken care of. That's number one. If if you're coming from a wealthy family, it's going to be your parents who want a prenup signed, just to protect all your interests in their businesses or trust or whatever it may be. You should know that inheritance is separate property. So if you are married and God forbid a parent passes away and you inherit $1 million, your spouse has no claim on that money. Put it in a separate bank account, they have no claim. So a lot of things we would do in a prenup are New York law. A prenup would just kind of tighten any loose ends. That's
what
number
they
one.
get for a prenup.
Yeah.
There is a get prenup, which I think is more widely accepted and used in more modern circles. I know that Hasidic Bezdins don't recognize it because they consider it a form of coercion to make somebody give a get. So as long as I would say, speak to your rabbi. If it's something that your rabbi respects and holds by, then definitely do it. There's no reason not to. Court? Yeah, because the way it's structured is that a man has an obligation to support his wife. And the way they've kind of used that Jewish concept in terms of prenup is they say, if a wife asks for a divorce and the husband says no, well, he still has an obligation to support her. So we'll say that he has to pay her $150 a day. So it's more like a spousal support that will terminate upon you giving a get. That's the way it works. Okay. It's not, again, they can't force him to give it, but if he doesn't want to give it, he's going to be paying $150 a day.
That's right.
Okay,
that's good to know, yeah. I had one more question.
I think
also, and then we'll just end after that. It's something that people have also come to me with as far as, not recently, but like a while ago, that if they're married and they want to leave their husband or wife and they leave the house, they were told that if they leave the house, then like if they have kids, I'm saying, then
they're not considered that they're living in the house.
And then there's like an issue with custody. Like they're not allowed to leave the house. Like someone told me that her like basically she had to stay in the same house with him for like 6 months while they were sorting everything out.
Okay, so you're talking about two different things. I think a lot of people ask me about the concept of abandonment when you leave the house. The other is, if you're living together, are you allowed to just take your kids and leave?
Yeah, it is two separate questions, correct.
Right? So in terms of abandonment, I've never seen it come into play in any case. I've done over 650 cases now. Abandonment has never come up. Abandonment is really if you're gone for more than a year. That's a grounds for divorce.
So it's misinformation that people have taken and blown up.
If you don't ever fear leaving an abusive relationship because you think you're going to be told you abandoned and therefore you have
but also losing the house or forfeiting the house.
No, you're not forfeiting any of your rights to any assets by moving out of the house. You don't have to be living in the house to have a 50% claim on it if it's a long-term marriage. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Regarding the issue of if you have kids together, well, look, if you go and get an order of protection, the abusing spouse is forced out of the house.
Right.
So that's one thing. Two is it's a gray area because there are no rules. You're still married. So you could leave, but it's a dicey situation because number one, first thing I would be thinking about is forget, the legal aspect. Is that what your kids want? Do they want to not be around their father? Are you introducing this in a structured way, or are you just picking up in the middle of the night? Because that's traumatic to your kids. Do you really want to be doing that?
Also depends on the ages of the kids.
Ages of the kids. It's so specific that I don't really want to go into that too much because it would really, all the specifics would matter in
Okay.
this,
Yeah.
for that type
So
of question.
ask
good
your
to know,
lawyer
yeah.
for
Right.
sure, and that's a good time to get one.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And again, you can always go in for a consultation without being a person who's sure of what they
Sure.
want yet.
Absolutely.
That's totally fine. You can go and make
Totally
an appointment.
fine. And I
Go
also,
and sit down, hear what your rights are,
I would
and
tell you
you could
this.
stay together with your husband for another 10 years if you want to. But just to have the information and the clarity, I
Right.
think is important.
I would even say go for a consultation with an attorney that you may not be able to afford to maybe represent you,
Oh.
because it's a one-time shot.
Yeah.
You can pick their brain, and even if you're going to get a free attorney for the actual case, to have gotten that one-on-one contact and understanding and to prep, because look, when you get your free attorney, you're already in the case, right? So you can't go and get necessarily as easily free advice by just showing up to the court. There are volunteer attorneys, but it's hard to get consultations, and they're reluctant to give legal advice. But so go and splurge a little bit, put some
Yeah.
money away, get a good consultation, and
And then you can
can
go
decide
and
what you're
say,
gonna
this
do
is
after
the
that.
recipe. Let's say you
Exactly.
bought an expensive recipe, but now someone else can make it. And
correct.
the soup may not be just as good, but it'll be pretty damn good compared to not having any recipe.
Again, they're not going to be following.
My soup analogy.
I wouldn't go with that analogy completely.
Okay.
But I
It's
would
not a
say,
recipe. He said not cookie cutter.
Right.
Right,
No.
but meaning you can get
Yeah.
advice.
Well,
and
you
then-
need advice. You need good
Information.
advice, and
Yeah.
you need timely.
Information.
So, and again, taking on a retainer is a bigger endeavor than coming up with $300 to $400 or $500 for
Yeah.
a really good session of advice.
Yeah,
It's great.
very true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, all of the information for these two amazing individuals is going to be linked and listed on the screen. I urge you guys to, stay healthy, strong, think about your relationships, and continue being rock stars. And thank you to you
You're
both.
welcome.
Seriously,
Thank
this
you
was
for having
amazing.
me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.